you shouldn't be making an investment decisions just because there is a negative gearing benefit attached to it, or because you're not paying any stamps on it. Ultimately, the investment decision should be made based on the fundamentals of the suburb and the property itself. Tax is an added strategy. It's not the only strategy. Hello and welcome to Helpmebuy Property Podcast. Today we are going to talk about our house and land packages, or typically off the plan properties, worth investing. We're going to talk about what a house land package is. We are going to talk about what the growth corridors and the growth suburbs are, why our house and land package is predominantly in these areas, why are land sales offered in stages, and does that mean that you should never buy a house and land package or a property in a growth corridor? More importantly, we are also going to talk about the risks associated with house and land packages and what is better than buying a house and land package. Ultimately, we are going to share some examples of the value that can be created outside house and land packages and with house and land packages. We're also going to bust the myths in relation to negative gearing, exclusive real estate deals, rental guarantees in relation to house and land packages. And the last and the most important question, is house and land package worth buying, and who are the people who it would serve the justice for? Thank you for listening to us today, and stay tuned till the very end. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or feedback, please jump into the comments. Welcome and listen to the full episode. Take care.
And welcome again back to the Helpmebuy Property Podcast. I am your host, Cheryl Leong, and my amazing co-host, Moxin Reza. How are we all? Mox, how are we doing today?
Hello, Cheryl. I am awesome. How are you today?
Oh, I'm going to be talking about a really, really interesting topic which comes up very often, and especially with investors looking to purchase house and land or off the plan. And this is a really contentious topic because, a lot of people are like, yeah, it's fantastic. I can potentially catch a wave and, double the price or whatever. And then the other side, you've got the other camp which are like, no, off the plan, it's terrible. So I think we're going to go through and weigh up some of the pros and cons of this today. So we're ready to rock and roll.
100%. And look, everyone, you think about house and land package, every investor that I've ever spoken to, majority of them have dabbled their feet into house and land package, including myself, right? And so I'm not going to lie that, we haven't purchased these, but as a first-time investor versus an experienced investor, you tend to reflect and think about some of these things in hindsight and say, okay, what could we have done differently? How does the mechanics of some of these things work to make better decisions? So super excited about the topic.
Yeah. And what I want to ask and for us to explore is that, are they the same considerations to make when you're an investor as opposed to a owner-occupier as well? So I think there's this sort of difference as well we need to be able to talk about.
100%. Yes.
Let's dive in. To start off with, let's give some context. What is house and land, and what is off the plan? Are they the same? Are they the same beast?
Look, ultimately, if you think about house and land package, or off the plan properties, or land and build, they're all similar names. What you're doing is basically a land and a build on it, and so if it's a house and land package, it's a package deal by a builder who is buying the land from the developer or holding that land from the developer and packaging it for you, so you don't have to go out and find a builder for yourself. Usually there are two contracts, one contract with the builder, one contract with the land developer. And that's how the house and land package works. Sometimes you would hear people talk about single contracts where the land has been settled by the builder and they are selling it as a single contract. And so you pay a small deposit up front and the balance of the money comes in at the tail end when you're getting the house. People tend to advertise this for a lower holding cost or SMSF, type of product. with single contracts in place. A lot of townhouses are self-sold as single contract as well, because the subdivision doesn't go through, and so you would see a lot of brand new townhouses are sold as a small deposit up front, and then everything coming in at the tail end. So very similar mindsets, and there is a lot of attraction to this product, of course, right? You think about it that they are pitched as you can save stamp duties on it. You only need like 5%, in some cases 10% deposit. People offer, equity buybacks. People offer, no deposit schemes. So there's heaps of schemes that are attached to these house and land packages. The interesting bit is this, and this is an owner occupier in me talking about it. When I bought this long time ago, the natural attraction is that you pay 5% or $10,000 or $15,000 or $5,000, and you become an owner of a land in 18 months or 24 months or 3 years. And so a lot of dependency on the decision making is that future growth that people naturally think about when they're making some of these decisions.
Yeah. And maybe in terms of understanding how these house and land packages and off the plan come about, from what I understand, back in the good old days, a developer will develop something, and typically they would only sell this when they're completed. However, because of funding, because of finance, and because developers, there was a requirement that they needed to have enough debt coverage. So without going into too much detail, it required developers to sell some of their stock earlier before it was actually constructed, so that it could cover. The banks had a level of confidence or assurance that that they would be able, this would be a project that would be successful in a way out there.
Definitely.
Go ahead. And hence why developers typically would sell something off the plan with a bit of a discount to what it eventually would end up for. That was in the old days. I say in the old days, maybe it was about 10 years ago, but that was the case then, where it was basically to be able to keep a development off. And it still happens now. There's still a requirement for pre-sales and so on. So, in some ways there is a certain level of discount there. However, there are times where we've seen where what you've purchased for actually doesn't value up to what it ends up being. Yes. So there's been cases where it's been a discount and you've been able to catch the wave, and it values up, and you've made some equity at that point. But it's a little bit of a gamble, isn't it? Because then you don't know what the market's done and whether that value is actually going to then stack up. Because we've seen these, especially in places like the Gold Coast and so on, where there was just a whole lot of stock that came on, pre GFC sort of thing, and then the banks, and then when they came to settlement, the banks just said too much exposure in this location. We're going to pull back the valuations, and you had people that had to basically shell out more money.
Definitely.
To be able to sell it.
What people don't realize is that ultimately any growth that is coming through these areas are driven because of the supply constraints that is controlled by the developer. So you think from a developer's perspective, they will have numerous stages, of cutouts, I'll call it cutouts, of these land developments or land subdivisions coming through. And one of the reasons they have these stages coming through is because they want one stage's profit to fund the next stage, and the next stage's profit to fund the next stage. And so that's how they're doing it. They're slowly and gradually, banking it on. Of course, there is development profits in the developments, but they are also banking on some growth profit as well, because they're controlling the supply, and so they're pushing the prices up slightly. Now imagine, there is 200 lots or 300 lots, and an extra 5 or 10,000 increases is a big number in their profitability, when they're selling such a big lots. And so in order to lure these people in for the first 20 lots or first 10 lots at a discount, of course, you might get that, but you don't know. Sometimes builders might pick these lots, because ultimately they are buying in chunks, so they're buying in bulk. So it's important to understand some of these differences. It happened to me. I remember 2010, I think it was, or 2009, I think, or 8, I think, when I dabbled my feet into house and land package. Bought it for $260, the bank valued at $230, so $30,000 out of my pocket that I had to pay. And I was like, whoa, what happened there? First time I was like, how can the property that I know is valued at a contract price and the bank is actually going backwards on some of these things? I think it was 2008 from memory. So it happens. And so, people need to understand why it happens. And we are going to go a bit more deeper into some of these things. But it's important to also talk a bit about, Cheryl, about growth corridor and growth suburb. Do you want to go into a bit more detail about, these growth corridors where these developments are happening?
Yeah, so let's clarify what those terms mean. Growth corridor, suburbs. Are they one and the same thing, or are we talking about really different locations as well?
Yeah. It's interesting, right? I mean, you see media talking a lot about growth corridors, and you see government talking about growth corridors all the time. And usually when they talk about growth corridors, it's about areas where there's heaps of land available. Government is bringing in a lot of new infrastructure. They're expecting future population growth. There is train station coming, new shopping centers coming, etc. All of that is coming through. And so naturally it attracts people, right? People think that, more people means that the prices are going to go up. What they forget is that the supply is enough to catch for the demand. And so the laws of economics comes into place, that if there is enough supply to catch the demand, then the prices don't go up. The supply has to be really, really constrained, and a higher demand would basically go up and prices would push the prices up. And so when you talk about growth corridors, naturally when you hear people or sales agent talks about, there's a new train station coming, there is a brand new school coming here, there is a footy ground coming here, there is Westfield coming here. All of these things, of course, developer knows about it, right? He has done the plan of subdivision. It's his town planning, right? He has thought of all of these through, and they're already built into the price. Naturally, people putting a premium on top of these prices is what the developer's expectation is, so that he can charge more for the next stage, right? So, paying a premium, all of these crazy nomination sales that we would talk about is because of this notion that people think that, okay, a new train station is going to add premium to this particular state, but that's really not the case. It's a controlled supply that basically drives the prices up. You think about the growth suburb is slightly different to the growth corridor. When you talk about the growth suburb, it's about a mature suburb where all the development has happened, all the infrastructure has come through, the schools are there, everything is there. And now the growth that is coming through in these areas is true growth dependent on the demand of the owner-occupier who really, really wants to live there. It's not a developer-controlled supply driving the demand up. It's actually owner-occupier wanting to live there, paying a premium for the property, which basically drives the price up. And so there is a clear distinction between a growth suburb and a growth corridor. And so people should never get confused about, some of these notions that, a lot of sales agents puts on in selling some of these house and land packages.
And I'd like to sort of play devil's advocate in this aspect as well. Like, growth corridors, not saying that they'll never grow, right? But it's saying if you're getting in early, if you're the first cab off the rank, and it tends to be really attractive from an owner-occupier point of view. Like, it's a new school, everything's brand new, it's parks, it's all this huge amount of infrastructure spending there. And all the houses and all the streets, so everything looks nice. It's a place where generally young families want to move into and so on. So if you're at the start of that, like, it's boring to, but if you're willing to hold on to that for a while, like, you're going to be there for a while, and understand that it's like suburbs generally have a natural sort of end anyhow. This freeway to this freeway. That's sort of suburbs. You've got an ending to that suburb. But if you're at the very beginning, you're going to have to wait a few years for that suburb fills up.
Yes.
And you that catching up. However, once it sort of catches up, and then that's when that pressure cooker, that's what it is now, and there's no more additional growth, no more additional supply. That's when you can really see that growth that we talked about.
Definitely.
We're talking in Sydney, northwest, suburbs like Kellyville. So that's a good example of farmland that has been developed, and we didn't see a lot of growth at the beginning of it in 2015 or around there when it started. But you look now, and I know, pretty much all of Australia had growth in 2020, but that particular suburb has become such high demand because of.
Definitely, 100%. I was there in 2016 in Kellyville. I still remember that it was just about to start, and there was an 1,800 square meter land that was selling for $650,000, and I said no to it. I was like, it's a farmland, I don't want to buy these. I have a development that's going on. Is it a regret? Yes, because naturally, when you think about some of these things, that when you are looking at a growth corridor converting into a growth suburb with higher demand, lower supply, what you want to do is, if you're an owner occupier and can sit there and wait, it's great. It's awesome. It's amazing. But as an investor, does it make sense to wait that long? My view of the world has slightly shifted and changed. And, I think that if there is a massive development coming in the area, then you should just buy established property with a big land next to that development. And as the land prices go up, you would see the same amount of growth coming to your land at the same time, and you wouldn't be paying the premium of the state.
Yeah.
And there are countless number of examples. You look at Clyde in Melbourne, you look at Point Cook in the west, you look at Williams Landing, you look at again Kellyville, Marsden Park. So heaps of examples where you can see that playing out, that early buyers don't get to see, or they get to see a similar sort of land appreciation to people who are buying 5 or 6 years into the development as well. And so, the view of the world is that it usually takes about, 5 or 6 years for a growth corridor to mature. And once it's closer to that maturity, you should enter in and buy in as an investor. But as a first-home buyer, or if you're looking for an investment to live in or a property to live in, then it's perfect. You just buy and sit there and wait and play the wait game. But as an investor, for example, if there are 10 stages to a particular development, maybe enter at stage 8, or stage 9, and you would see some growth coming through rather than entering at, stage 1.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's a good example, would you say, of a growth suburb? Are we talking about established areas where then there's a new development, or are we talking about just established areas that just have some level of this, there's something that triggers it to start to grow, you know what I mean?
Well, ultimately, when you think about, majority of the house and land packages, they would always come in what we call it is greenfield areas, right? But if you talk about house and land packages in infield areas, then the story definitely changes, right? Because the supply is crunched, a developer has come in and just released 20 lots or 30 lots, and the land is a premium. There's a lot of demand, and naturally, buying a house and land there would do wonders to you, right? You can think about some of these examples in, say, Burwood or Springvale, where there was literally farmland sitting there that was released really, really late. There is Century Lakes in Point Cook that did a lot of that as well. There is areas in Adelaide that has done, typically that as well. For example, Aldinga Beach, Renella, Morfettvale, they had small pockets of, 50 lots or 20 lots that was released, and, everything pretty much developed. And so, house, and even like Miguel in Adelaide, I remember one of my client has bought a house and land package there. Not that I sold it to them, I'm quite biased, but they bought a house and land package in Miguel at the right time. I think around 2018, 2019 for 550, that property is now worth about almost $1 million close to the mark. So amazing purchase, nothing wrong with that. So
fantastic. And you've always seen these in terms of the plan in established suburbs, which would be, and I think of, I used to live in New South Wales, like say for the North Shore, where you've got areas that are quite, in terms of price-wise, they're up there. And then you come and see this releasing of land that allows for like townhouses and things like that, where then developers are creating a more affordable product in a tightly held area, which a lot of people are priced out of. And they sell townhouses off the brand, whichever. So in that circumstance, how would you describe that sort of property? And is that something which ticks the box to say, hey, that's potentially a good buy? And I know you're biased, but it's
look, from an investment perspective, anything that comes with a land would attract some sort of growth, right? And so if you have a choice between buying a freehold land versus buying a land in a strata or a land in in a subdivision, for example, then you would rather always go for a freehold title. And so the typical example that you've given is an amazing example. And so a lot of these infill developments where they're building townhouses, my preference would always be to buy the front lot, which is usually on its own title, and forget the lots at the back or forget the lots on the side, because it comes with its premium land, which means that the prices would go up. Does the prices at the back lots go up as well? Yes, potentially they would, because they are so tightly controlled markets, right? But if it was an apartment, you wouldn't see that growth. And so people need to understand that even apartments are sold as off-the-plan properties. And some of these tightly held areas where there are school zones, there are, high-end houses, to create an affordable product, a developer would come in and do a 3-level apartment or a 4-level apartment building, and people would naturally think that, I would get growth in there too. You don't. It's always associated with the land. The land drives or attracts the demand. Of course, there are some limitations to this methodology, right? You think about Bondi, you think about Point Piper, if there are apartments there, they're still selling at 1.5, 2 million, 3 million, even 5 million apartments, right? Or penthouses, etc. And so you see some growth coming through some of these areas too. And so it's a completely niche and a different market, but usually it doesn't happen everywhere. You can't replicate this to Gold Coast or to Melbourne or to Brisbane or to Adelaide.
So let's sort of break it down and summarize a little bit in terms of when it's a good time to consider house and land gone off the plan. So we talked around, getting things from government grants, being able to have smaller deposits to hold onto as well. I just wanted to add another benefit of potentially buying off the plan is that with deposits, you can, instead of tying up your deposit, you can use tools like deposit bonds. So you pay dollars if something's going to settle in 2 years or so, you're not tying up your funds there.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's there. Typically, you're buying in an area that's going to be, there's a whole lot of investment that goes into infrastructure, new shops, and all of that, new schools. That's why you pay really high contributions, because that all goes towards that. What are some other things we covered in terms of why it's not a bad idea? We talked about it being generally a better area for owner-occupiers as well, and newer properties. So you've got newer properties, new streets, so on and so forth. Is there anything that we've missed from that part? In terms of why it's a good idea?
The only caveat to all of this is, as an owner-occupier, if you're looking to enter into the market and you have a really low deposit, then, house and land would be a perfect fit for you, okay? The other thing that I always say to people as an investor, if you don't have a lot of money and you are still keen on investing, then house and land could be a great place to start. right? Because ultimately you're entering into the market. Entering into the market is the key. A lot of people wait for those big bank deposits, and I say, look, if you only have 20K that you would buy an expensive car for, just put it towards the land, right? It's simple as that. Rather than waiting for that $50,000 or $100,000 that you're going to build up. Yeah, you would get an opportunity to sell. Potentially in Melbourne, you could flip it or you can settle it, and there is a small risk that is attached to it. And so, if you talk about investment grade property, I think house and land packages sit at the lowest level, when you talk about the scale from 1 to 10, 10 being the best and 1 being the lowest. Probably house and land sits somewhere around 2 or 3, just above apartments. Because there is land attached to it, you would still see growth coming through. You can't discount and say, oh, there would be no growth. There would definitely be growth in these properties. It's not that it wouldn't. So that's the key thing. Ultimately, if you talk about the risks, what are the key risks when you think about these properties? Naturally, people treat a lot of these properties as a gambling exercise, right? You would buy 3 land or 4 land or 5 land. You don't need to pay a lot of money. You can pay $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 and hold, on each property and hold 5 properties or 8 properties or how many X you want, in anticipation that these properties would grow by $20,000 each, and 10 properties at $20,000, at $200,000 that you can make in 2 years. It works in the seller's market, but it wouldn't work in the buyer's market. And so I've seen people getting caught where they had 5 titles on themselves and they were holding them to make a quick $100,000 over 2 years, and the market changed or the market switched or the demand disappeared or there was excess supply coming through. And all of a sudden now you're in a position where you need $1 million or $1.5 million to settle these, and you don't have that sort of serviceability because there is no income attached to it. You can't back out of the contract because these contracts are usually done in such a way that there is no finance clause attached to it. And so you are right on the risk from day one. And so now you're losing your deposits on 4 properties at $40,000, settling 1, making it $20,000. And so you're netting off basically nil or in a negative $20,000 position. And so be careful in relation to the risks and understand that, you're not at the risk for $20,000, you're at a risk for the full price of the contract. That's naturally what people need to understand when buying some of these things.
Yeah, and the big risk at the moment, and I know it's all out in the media, is that you've got builders who are not quite making it build. So that's a big risk. That in the current market, we're seeing that we've got a very, very large builder, very large reputable builder who's just gone under liquidation. And we're seeing this a lot in small and large builders. So there is the risk there. I'd like to say that there is some way that people can manage it, but when you're talking about really, really large builders, you don't get access to their finances or whatever. Well, like you can ask that to one. You can ask that of your small scale builder to be able to get some level of comfort. But these large builders, it's quite hard. So that's a big risk. We know that it is. Is it a small risk in the current market? It's actually a very realistic and risk there. So you do have to consider what happens in that circumstance as well.
Definitely. And look, people have been, some of the key risks, as you mentioned before, also is that the banks might decide to value this lower than the contract price. And so you buy something at 300 and the bank comes down and says, no, we are going to only give you 250. You have 3 of these and all of a sudden you are out of pocket by 150 plus 20% deposit. And so you're stuck, right? And so people need to understand that does happen. Just because you haven't seen it happening doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. I'm seeing a lot of that in Box Hill right now, in Austria right now, where, the lands were selling all the way from 350 in 2018 to almost 800, 850, and now coming back to 600, right? And so people who have signed the contract or bought a nomination sale or done whatever at 700, 750, they go to the bank to value these, and you'd be getting a 650, 600 valuation. And so you are significantly out of pocket on some of these, these deals on especially the land acquisitions. So you have to be really, really careful.
Absolutely. So what are the considerations then? So if we were going, okay, well, house and land off the plan, what's better than that? I want something that's fairly low risk. It makes me feel like I've purchased into something. I'm moving ahead with my portfolio. Now, again, for a lot of people, that might be an option to do the house and land, but what are big options there?
Yeah. Look, ultimately, when you're starting off and you are starting off on a low deposit, because house and land is attractive for people with low deposit, right? And so say if you have $50,000 or $60,000, go into a regional area and buy something around 350. That should be suffice with a big land, with an income coming to you, of course, in a growth suburb rather than a growth corridor. And so mature suburb where there's a lot of demand, there's a lot of infrastructure coming through, and you would see that, you would get growth coming back to you quite quickly. You would get the yield, the income, the banks are going to love you. You're basically bypassing a lot of these troubles in relation to the builders. The interesting bit is this, right? I've heard so many times, and this is me busting the myths now, that there is all these negative gearing benefits that people talk about in house and land because they're brand new, and stamp duty savings, etc., all of that. And so if you think about it, from a negative gearing perspective, you shouldn't be making an investment decisions just because there is a negative gearing benefit attached to it, or because you're not paying any stamps on it. Ultimately, the investment decision should be made based on the fundamentals of the suburb and the property itself. Tax is an added strategy. It's not the only strategy, So, people naturally think, I was talking to a client today, actually, and she said to me that, hey, my only way to build my portfolio is to save tax. And I said, okay, so you want to spend... Yeah, and so naturally, that's how people think, right? People who are on $300,000, $400,000 income or $500,000 income, they're like, oh, they're paying just way too much tax, right? And so it's like, okay, and so you should be saving the tax while the properties are still neutrally positive, right? Or cash positive or neutrally geared, right? You shouldn't be like losing $20,000 from your disposable income to save $5,000. That's just ridiculous. That just doesn't make any sense, right? And so it's important to understand that difference is that while negative gearing, works in certain scenarios, that's not a strategy to play. It's a byproduct to interest rates and deposits that you're going to charge, right? And so every time an interest rate goes up, you see a lot of sales agents saying, hey, negative gearing, and the interest rate goes down and they say, hey, positive cash flow. So, you shouldn't go into that mix. You should focus more on the sustainability of your portfolio rather than going down these routes of negative gearing.
And I'm sure we'll talk about negative gearing in another episode. But at some point, negative gearing is eating into your serviceability and your available funds, and you're gonna hit your ceiling a lot sooner than if you
Definitely. Well, banks hate you. If you're negative gearing a property, the banks you're not their best loved son, let's put it that way. They definitely hate you.
They don't look at it favorably. So, okay, so we've got, the land component. We've got the land component. If you can buy something in an area that, again, we talk about this pressure cooker sort of thing. Like look at the fundamentals, look at what's being around the area, what's surrounding, and how much supply and demand, the economics of this. And is it somewhere that we're buying brand new as well, or an established?
No, I think established definitely offers better opportunities because you would be going for a house which is as close to the land value as possible. And so people who say, for example, want to make a lifestyle choice, right? And so they have a decent deposit in place. I would say, rather than going out and buying a house and land package, go into the same suburb and just buy a big piece of land, right? And so naturally, as the developer pushes the land prices up, because your land is in the same suburb, probably, very close to the development, you would see that growth coming through to your properties naturally. Yeah, you don't have to do anything because ultimately, your lifestyle choice doesn't have to be in that development. It can be outside the development as well. Okay. And that would reap a lot better benefits from your perspective than, someone else. People need to understand is that while the land appreciates, the building depreciates, right? So from a house and land perspective, if I'm buying a land for say $300,000, right? And I'm building a $300,000 house, the bank is valuing it at 600. If the land goes up by say 20,000 every year, my house value does not go up by 20,000 every year. It's not that my house goes to 620 and then 640 and then 660. It doesn't happen that way. And the reason is because the build process remains pretty consistent. And so people would still be able to buy in that same pocket or build in that same pocket for relatively around 620, 630 at any given point in time. Even if the land prices are going up, the builders would, try to force that product into some way, shape or form at that price point. And so naturally what tends to happen is that you would see as your house gets older, it's depreciated more. And so your value might go from say 600 to 620, 630, 640 over the next 4 or 5 years. But the land price keeps going up. And so if you're just holding the land on cash, you would see the appreciation coming through. And so that's the whole concept. If you buy a bigger piece of land on established house, then you would see the appreciation coming in your own established home quite significantly, because bank is not valuing the house. People will not be valuing an old house anyway.
Yeah, and with the older house, you've got more scope to be able to add value. If you want to be able to put a granny flat at the back, extend, whatever that might be, you've got the ability to do that. So
definitely,
I guess to start to round things up as well, for those of you who are looking at house and land or off the plan, there are some red flags I think we want to be able to point out as well.
Yes.
And some things you might not be aware of, but then look really attractive. So one of the things is taking note if whoever's selling you the property, and often it might be a project marketer. So project marketers are often with developers. You'll find that they want to push their stock as quickly as possible. So they'll have not just one exclusive agent, they'll have lots of an open agency. And what that means is that you often see that these agents get paid at an eye-watering amount of commission. And I say eye-watering, I have seen them when they have been 50,000, 60,000 in commission.
Yes.
And why that happens is because that agent has an agreement with the developer, but that agent has 5 other agents that they've got conjunctions with, and they're like, we'll share this commission. I've got $60,000 commission. I get 30, you get 30. So there's $60,000 worth in that price that you paid for, and that's going to an agent, which is really great for the agent. You sort of have to, oh my goodness, like that amount of money could have been a saving in your rec as well. So if you're going through sort of project marketing.
And we know this because, Cheryl, as developers within us, we paid some of that money to the project marketing people as well, right? When we are selling our own projects, and the poor person who's buying this project at the other end, this is the market norm. And so my advice to people is that instead of buying a house and land package, just go buy a land from a developer directly so that you're paying less amount of that commission, and then just find a builder yourself, a reputed builder, and build it yourself, rather than just getting a house and land package, because then naturally you're paying that commission on the house and the land component both, right? And so, usually you would see that these lands attract less of these commissions versus the houses, because they're built into the build contract majority of the times, and the kickbacks come from the builder rather than the land division or the land developers. So that's a quick tip. So it's a very important red flag. And so people or real estate agents talk about exclusive deals, tightly held stock. You just need to be really careful of, as soon as someone says exclusive, there is no exclusivity in some of these greenfield developments.
Yeah, absolutely. And the second red flag is when the ad says rental guarantee. So they're trying to attract investors that got rental guarantees, and we used to see these everywhere. It's 7% rental guarantee because the investors will go in and go, oh, I heard people are going to rent this property out, but the developer's giving me a 7% rental guarantee. I'm good for the next 3 years. After the 3 years, we've seen where there's been crickets for that rental.
Yes. It happened to one of my friends recently. I mean, I met him, or, we were talking about this particular house that he was acquiring in Melbourne. And so he purchased that house with a 7% rental guarantee for 2 years. And I did say, look, yes, for 2 years it's great, but you're paying a premium for that rental guarantee, right? The builder doesn't pay, or the property manager doesn't pay rental guarantees from their pocket, right? If the house is worth 700, they'll mark it up to 740, and that $40,000 is basically your rental guarantee. You are paying for your own rental guarantee, right? It's just packaged into the deal in such a way that, you naturally think that, these rental guarantees are for your protection. But it's great from a bank's perspective, especially if you are an owner-occupier and if you want to live there in 3 years' time, then yeah, go for it, right? Get a rental guarantee, and 3 years down the track, you might have saved enough, or, you can pay this off quickly, etc. There might be some positives to it, but naturally don't think about some of these things as, oh, rental guarantee is great, because when you come off these rental guarantees and the market, and you come to the market rentals, it is quite painful. That transition is quite painful.
Yeah, so to just do a quick roundup, house and land off the plan, they're not necessarily bad things. They're just, we've highlighted some of the things to consider when you're going through this. There are definitely some benefits there, particularly if you're a owner-occupier. Look at the areas that you're buying in. Are you going to be there for a long time? There all these considerations into, then weigh up whether it's something that works for you or not. And it needs to be a part of a long-term and thought-out strategy as to what you're doing. And we've talked about strategy before in previous episodes. So, Moss, any final words before we wrap this all up?
Look, I think you've pretty much summarized all of this. If you're making a lifestyle choice, house and land, not so bad. If you're making an investment choice, yes, there are better choices out there.
Absolutely. Alrighty. Awesome. Well, thank you very much for listening. I'd love to hear the audience's experiences with off the plan house and land packages, whether it was a great outcome for you and whether it was a not so good outcome for you. It'd be great to get your input and share your experiences, share your journey with us. And it also helps us come up with more topics to be able to share with you as well. So until our next episode, thanks you very much for Moxin and myself from the Helpmebuy Property Podcast. Speak to you later. Bye.
Thank you very much. Take care. Adios.